Chapter 110. Hazel's your aunt? Said Alden, selecting a few of his favorite things out of a bag of trail mix. It was only the two of them in the apartment since Lexi was spending the night with his family and Hoyu was still hanging out with his mom. They'd had the driver drop them off at a grocery store near campus, and they'd bought snacks. Alden was just picking at his. He was too full of Webby to really enjoy it. Yeah, said Lute, prying the foil lid off a second cup of flan. Genetically, she's Alia's daughter. Which means she's sort of Hugh's aunt, too, even though Hugh is the guy she calls her dad. And she calls Corin her grandpa, but he's technically her brother. Immortal families are so different. I do know it's weird to people from families that aren't into deliberately breeding wonder kids, but it doesn't actually feel like a huge deal when you grow up with it. Alia calls Hazel her granddaughter, and that's just how it is. I don't even think about it much until I have to start explaining it to someone else. And Hazel's really proud of who her genetic parents are. Oh, but her mom, Kitty? She freaks out if anyone brings it up. He licked the back of his spoon. I think maybe she wanted Hazel's real parentage to be a secret? She wanted to be the mother of a super child, so she asked to do it this way. But she also wanted everyone to think she had made an S rank without assistance like Hugh's first wife did with Orpheus. If that is what she hoped for, I don't know who decided to make it common knowledge. Probably Hugh trying to prove something to someone else in their family. Alden smiled and nodded politely. He'd done that a lot during Lute's explanation because what else was there to do? Anyway, people being appalled about the members of the family with unusual origins wouldn't bother me, except for the things they say about my mom. They act like she's not a person herself, just some kind of punishment Alia got for pushing it too far. You'll note the Grand Witch didn't try for the Artonan look again after Jessica. Hazel's so human average that I wonder if they didn't ask her designers to remove any features that might remind people of Alia's whiff. And that was yet another subject Alden had no idea how to comment on. I thought your mom looked kind of pretty in an older, semi-alien way, was so not the right thing. Alia's gene people undershot the height, though, didn't they? Was even worse. Artonans tended to be petite by human standards, but a significant part of that was due to the fact that they were less sexually dimorphic than humans when it came to body size. When they'd last met, Stuart was around 5'1" an inch taller. It wasn't like Alden had pulled out a measuring stick and asked the primary son to hold still. Alden didn't know if Stuart was still growing or not, but he was a pretty normal height for an adult on the true planets whether they were male or female. Jessica could have been the same height and fit in well with both Artonans and humans, assuming that was what Alia's goal had been. Maybe they couldn't select her height that specifically, so they erred on the side of extra short so that she'd match up with the Artonans for sure? Still. Why? It seemed unnecessary no matter how Alden looked at it. The only thing that made even a little bit of sense was the possibility that Alia had expected her daughter to be so in demand as an avowed that she would end up living on the true planets more than Earth. Which would mean she'd had Jessica's entire future job, home planet, and lifestyle planned out before she was born. Somehow that seemed even worse, when Alden really thought about it, than Alia picking such uncommon physical features for her. Nobody got to select their own natural starting appearance anyway. Everyone just made do with what they got, loving it or modifying as best they could. But we're supposed to get to choose the other stuff for ourselves, as much as the world will let us. Avowed we're already dealing with a lot of limitations. Having your mother plan your entire life out for you before you were even born on top of that? What did Alia expect you to be? Alden asked Lute. Did they have some other job picked out for you before you found out you were an avowed? You mean like how they had all the other children in the family stacked with tutors, and they started taking Hazel to meet her future employers when she was 8? I just assumed it went for you, too. It was different, said Lute. With everyone else there was this struggle, to impress Grandma, to earn one of the Chainer class assignments, to beat Mio and Roman. Mio and Roman? There was no point in any of them trying to beat Hazel, so nobody ever bothered. She has a legit psychic something going on, And apparently that's the level of exceptionality Sleyca has been aiming to breed into the family for years. And not just Grandwich. Other key relatives seem involved with it, too. He wrinkled his nose. I never wanted to ask for details, but I'm sure my mother was an early attempt. She said she'd tell me who my maternal grandfather was when I was older, but I stopped caring a while ago. I doubt it was Hazel's donor, Sond. He would have been kind of young, and they wouldn't have reused him if he'd sired a normal human. But it was probably someone like him. Not just a rank one, but one known for unusual mental abilities. I see, said Alden. That's interesting. You're so polite, man. I'd just assume half the kids our age around here were at least a little modified prior to becoming about, Alden admitted. It's really different from what I'm used to, but it's not that many. Plenty of people are still romantic about making children the old-fashioned way. And the ones who do take it as far as my family are usually shyer about admitting to it than Sleyca and company are. Lute slurped down another spoonful of flan. Some of them won't even tell their kids. But you were asking about Mio and Roman, cousins, obviously. They're around our age, and they're also, I don't know how to say it, of good stock? You probably should say it some other way. Luke shrugged. They're both really smart, super dedicated to chaining, and family-oriented. Sleyca adores them. They were the grandchildren for the others to beat, after Hazel. I haven't ever been close to either of them, but they've been on my mind more lately. Roman seriously got screwed. He scored an S, instead of the of that was more likely for him, and Hazel was still waiting. Oh, he's the one who got passed over, said Alden. He experienced an unexpected sympathy pang for the vulgar guy he'd never met. He spent his entire childhood aiming for a rank chainer. Got an S? And got. They actually gave him rabbit, said Lute. He told them to go fuck themselves unless they got him healer of body, which, Alden winced. Yeah. We're the people to see if you want a hard-to-get class, but healers. Even if they're not the rarest, people click yes the millisecond they find out they've hit the jackpot. They couldn't swing it for him. Not at his rank. And I know they must have been trying like hell because Corin's office handles class purchases and he'd feed Hazel his own liver if she said she was feeling peckish. He must have been sweating rivers, thinking Roman might get the big chainer instead of her. What the hell is so great about chainer? Alden asked. No offense. It's a cool class. Knowing what little I do, I'm thinking you have some amazing perks and job security. But for your grandma to want Hazel slotted into it so badly. I don't know. I have a lot of suspicions now that I've actually seen how things work. I doubt this is the whole story, but I think the ultimate goal might be to monopolize chainer. I gathered that, said Alden. The whole world has gathered that. Luke laughed. No, no. You don't get it. When I say monopolize chainer I don't just mean Sleyca's trying to make sure nobody else on Enzidora gets it. I mean I think we might really be trying to utterly monopolize chainer. In the universal sense. Alden stared at him. You mean including the other resource worlds? Yeah, said Lute. It might be the only class it's even possible to do it with. Chainer is already ultra rare on Earth, but it doesn't even exist on most planets. He held up his hands and wiggled his fingers at Alden. There are some unique anatomical requirements if you want to be good at the whole job instead of just parts of it. You have to have Artonin-looking hands, Alden said. Of course. And it would be twisted and weird for them to attach arms to a Udwi or something. The Udwi would not like that much, Lute agreed. Most species without at least 8 fingers and something like thumbs don't even bother to try word chains. They can sometimes make it work, but it would be like us trying to dig a sleeping burrow with our toenails. Not completely impossible, but why would we put ourselves through that? So of the large population species that leaves. Smithens and I guess the Fituna. Are Lorchish hands too long? They aren't, said Lute. They are quite good at word chains. But they've also got some strong beliefs, protected by their contract, that make it hard for the palace to use them in all the ways they'd like. Same with the Fituna. Their species practices word chains widely and respectfully. Parvatier loves them, and apparently they've produced some amazing chainers. But they refuse to be seen by aliens once they reach maturity, which makes them hard to handle. I think Parvadatur would happily chatter away at them through blindfolds or walls, but most people find that kind of thing inconvenient. So it's that Mithans, Alden said. Anise. And some rarer species. That's right. Until humans came along, the about of myth more or less had chainer jobs all to themselves. And then the palace took a peek at Earth and thought, wow. Look at those aliens. Those are some gorgeous bastards. Let's introduce them to our holy purpose. Alden laughed. Luke snorted. Seriously? I'm surprised they didn't send word chain missionaries over to proselytize the whole planet. I bet the Grand Senate told them to chill out and stay away from us until we get time to settle in. He coughed. I have a Mythan co-worker. He is so xenophobic against humans. What? Why? In his defense, the only humans he's ever met are my family members. So it's probably their fault. And if I'm right about the monopolization thing, Allah is on a long-term mission to make herself queen of the only chainer clan in the universe. He drummed his fingers. Anyway, that's the thing about chainer, or it's my best guess right now. Maybe Hazel is like her proof of concept. Her way of saying humans are better at this than anyone else. Not just humans either. Our family. You think she wants you to be the exclusive chainers for all of the triplanets? Is that even a possibility? They would have to take the class away from other planets, and even if they did, class assignments are supposed to be random here on Earth. You guys will eventually lose some of them to people who don't want to join the family. Yeah, said Loot. That's how it's supposed to be. But things can change. And the Palace of Unbreaking is a really unique institution. If Alaya could get more Hazels, if she could get the palace on board to manage the Artonan end of things, and she can manage the Earth half. It's long-term, like I said. But it doesn't sound completely impossible considering what a thorough job she's already doing. So Roman S. Rank, who's spent his whole life learning word chains, got rabbit, Alden concluded. Because Hazel has to get chainer. Because she's the one with the special ability that proves Vulras are naturally suited for it, and Alaya needs her to be at the palace all the time to keep that fact front and center. That's my theory. It makes sense, doesn't it? I see, said Alden with a straight face. That's interesting. Luke crumpled the foil lid up and tossed it at him. Mio hasn't been selected yet, he said. I really hope she doesn't get us. The Artonans probably aren't going to throw another top-rank position at Earth anytime soon unless someone dies, so if she does, it'll be Roman all over again. She's just as chainer-obsessed as he is. If she gets A, the adults have got a slot with her name on it ready and waiting. But if it's S, she's going to hate me forever. After hearing all of this, Alden said, I'm kind of surprised they gave you the chainer S. You mean because I only knew 6 word chains, hadn't been trained, had a fractious relationship with Grandma and the entire rest of my family, would have preferred several other classes, and don't speak Artonan. Lute said dryly. Those would seem to disqualify you if you've got other cousins lined up. Especially if Hazel wasn't completely out of the running. That's because you're missing another piece of it, said Lute. Or you just haven't realized how much it matters. Maybe it's one of those things Lexi and Hoyu are always teasing you about, an Anzidora social dynamic. We'll get there. Line of asterisks, Narcissus House Watergarden Road Apex January 9, 2034, line of asterisks, Luke Vilra was going to 3rd grade. Real 3rd grade. At a school. His mother had delivered the news a couple of weeks before Christmas. Now it was the first day, and the knowledge of what was about to happen to him was so surreal he felt like he was dressing another person's body in the new uniform. The summer uniform for primary students at Nilima Paragon Academy. Which was a school. For children. Avowed children. Whole roomfuls of them. He was scared and excited and more scared than excited, but both feelings were definitely present and, don't forget the pocket square. His mother's voice called from just outside the bedroom door. She was standing out there because Lute could dress himself, thank you. He was 8. In a couple of weeks, he'd be 9. Being born in January was an advantage for him, according to his mother, because he would be one of the oldest in his grade. He would not have trouble with the lessons, she promised. His tutors up until now would have been sufficient. What if they all speak Mandarin better than me? Lute had asked in Mandarin while they decorated one of the mansion's Christmas trees together. They won't, Jessica had assured him. What if they speak German better than me? They probably will if their parents were born in Germany. Don't worry about it. Your teacher will be speaking English anyway. What if they speak English better than me? English is your first language, Lute. That will make it even worse, he'd said shrilly. Now, he picked up the pocket square from where it sat on top of his duvet and tucked it into place. He walked over to the dressing mirror and examined himself carefully. In summer, primary students wore heather gray waistcoats, collared white shirts with short or long sleeves, clip-on sapphire blue ties, gray shorts or pants, and any closed-toe shoe of their preference. Third graders wore yellow pocket squares. The square color would change every year. In winter, there were coats or sweaters. In middle school, there were blazers. Lute was focusing on the clothes because so far they were the only real clue he had about what school would be like. "Are you dressed yet?" Jessica called. "Yes, Mom." The door opened. His mother smiled at the sight of him. "Aren't you handsome? What if the teacher won't let me go to the bathroom?" "They will. What if one of the cousins decides to go to school, too? You'll be the only member of the family there. I promise." "What if—" She swooped down on him and lifted him in a hug. "Mom. You'll wrinkle me." She kissed him on the forehead. "Come on. Grandma has presents for you before you leave. Let's go see her." Lute was surprised. He hadn't even seen much of Alaya during Christmas time, since she'd been busy on Ortonai with Hazel again. And he'd already been told that she wouldn't be available for his birthday this year. It didn't sting anymore. Much. He and his mother were a team. But he wished they were the only team in the household sometimes. Grandma Alaya and his mom were also a team. When Alaya wasn't on the triplanets, Jessica was with her more often than not. Or running errands for her. Or trying to make the other relatives do whatever Lute's grandmother wanted them to do. A lot of family members were loafers. Lute had heard Alaya tell Jessica and Aunt Carrie during a very rare girls' night in. She'd said that she despaired of the loafers ever becoming anything useful to anyone. Jessica was not a loafer. She was Alaya's principal assistant. It was an important job, which was why Jessica had the second best suites in every house they lived in. And also why Lute would be getting a cabin of his own on Libra when he turned 10, even though they were in such short supply and other family members coveted them. He thought it was Orpheus who was going to be kicked out. For being the loafiest loafer and for falling down the stairs a couple of months ago and landing on top of Chef Kabir. "Grandma's in the white parlor," Jessica told Lute, sending him out the door with a pat. "Go get your presents." Lute Villa was no stranger to presents. He'd once heard an uncle mutter, "God, Jessica spoils him rotten, doesn't she?" And Orpheus, drinking something that smelled like mouthwash out of a crystal punch glass, had laughed and said, "Do you think you can actually spoil a squirt like him with things? On this island? In this family?" Lute had thought about the two comments so much that he felt like he almost understood them. He walked down the curving stairs into the white parlor, a small hand trailing along the glossy railing, and he found his grandmother there alone. She was dressed in a tight black short-sleeved sweater and black cropped jeans. Her feet, in black ballet flats, were propped up on one of the downy white pillows. Her dark blonde hair was side-parted, and her face, younger than Lute's mother's, wore that familiar, lovely smile. "Lute, my dove," said Alaya Villa, setting down the croissant she had been having with her first coffee of the morning and standing to greet him. "Don't you look like a fine young man, today? Off to school. Come here and let me give you a hug." Lute smiled back. He ran to hug her eagerly. Alaya gave wonderful hugs. Like Jessica's, but taller. "Grandma, I'm going to be in third." "Nope," said Alaya, letting the word pop off her lips as she took a step back. "First, You have to impress me. I wore this outfit just for you. It's time for our little fashion game. Oh. Luke loved this. They hadn't done this in a while, but it was special. He was the only one who got to play this game with Grandma Aliyah. He knew some of the others had their own personal games with his grandmother, but he thought his was the best. He squinted at her clothes, thinking hard. It was such a simple outfit, compared to some he'd seen. Tight. Black on black. A big belt accentuating the pinch of her waist. He knew he had seen the style before because if she was wearing one for the first time for their game, she would explain it instead of asking him to guess. But the name. "Hind," said Aliyah, reaching over the back of a low chair and grabbing a black beret from the seat. She set it at a playful angle on top of her head. Then she stood leaning against the chair with her ankles crossed, waiting. "Beatnik," shouted Lute, finally capturing the word. "You're a beatnik." He had absolutely no idea what one was, but this was what one looked like. "Hooray!" cried Aliyah, throwing the hat into the air. "Perfect. I'll have to try something harder next time." Luke felt like he was the only person in Aliyah's world. She was very good at doing that. For the next half hour, they opened presents and talked about harps in the Beat generation and schools. "I am very experienced with schools," said Aliyah, poking a piece of croissant into Luke's mouth as they cuddled together on the sofa. "I went to one from 5 to 15. 10 whole years. And let me tell you, it's tough work. You'd better try hard." "I will," Luke said seriously. "Almost none of your aunts, uncles, or cousins have gone to school until they were adults on their way to college." Well, there was Keiko. But Keiko made such a lot of noise about the fact that she was going to high school for such a long time that we were all bored with it by the time she finally got around to it. She winked at him. "Don't tell her I said that, though. Keiko's never here." "That's because Keiko is still making a lot of noise about running away from the family," Aliyah said. "It's what she does. You're different. You're going to one of the best schools in the whole entire country. And you're only 8. I'm very proud of you, Lute." Lute wriggled closer to her. The praise was so warm. "Now, I know your mother has had a few little talks with you about school, but let me give you some advice of my own. Do you know who you will be going to school with? Other boys and girls who are 8. "Yes. And what else do you know about them? A lot of them have important parents." Aliyah nodded, but he could tell from her face that the answer wasn't sufficient. "They'll all know each other already." A nod. "They'll know lots about us because you're on the council." Another nod. Luke suspected he knew what she wanted him to say, but he mentioned every other thing about the children he'd be meeting today first, in hopes that he wouldn't have to. Finally, there was nothing else left. "None of them are going to be ordinary when they grow up," he whispered. "Just me." "But you won't be ordinary, my dove," said Aliyah, holding him close. "That's what I wanted to tell you. You are, and always will be, a Volra. And I'm sure as you meet more of the world, you'll come to see how very wonderful that is. Because I have built this family into something bigger than its individual members. Even if you are the weakest and the least of the Volras, you are still one of us, and we are more important than any of those children you are going to school with." Luke looked down at his shoes. Something about this reassurance didn't feel quite as good as his grandmother seemed to think it should. "Your family is your power, Lute. And it's more power than you know. As long as you take care of the Volra name, it will take care of you." "How do I take care of our name?" he asked. "Oh well," said Aliyah. "It's nothing you have to work too hard at just yet. Study. Don't get into trouble. Make some nice friends at your new school. It's a good place for you to meet people who will be somebodies one day, and everyone needs to know a few somebodies. When you grow up, you can do the same sort of work for us as your mother. You'll be my cabin 3. How does that sound?" "Good," Luke said slowly. "Can I? If I live in cabin 3, can I still visit Austria?" Aliyah tilted her head. "Austria? The country in Europe? I might want to go there someday," Luke said nervously. "To play my harp." Aliyah smiled. "Dear, You can play your harp wherever you want." Chuckling, she added to herself, "Austria. How random." Before his mother came to get him a few minutes later, Aliyah helped him tuck his new presents into his new backpack. His first cell phone, a tablet, a smartwatch, an emergency locator medallion he was to wear under his shirt at all times, everything a young man needed before he went out into Anzidora on his own. "And one more thing," said Aliyah, producing a shiny red card out of thin air. Luke's eyes fixed on it at once. "The best presents always got teleported in that way for dramatic effect. I'll be quite busy for the rest of this month, so I'm afraid I won't be able to attend whatever exciting event you decide to put on for your birthday. But this should make up for it." She passed him the card. "It's an SliceOfLife," Luke said. He hadn't had one before because he'd never gone anywhere without a grown-up. But he'd seen his mothers and fathers. And his cousins. "It's your very own SliceOfLife," Aliyah said enthusiastically as she handed it to him. "And guess how much money is on it?" Luke gave the question due consideration. Hazel had gotten one with 1,000 gold on it for Christmas. She had kept finding excuses to put things in and out of her wallet so that she could show it off. He didn't want to guess that much because it would be so embarrassing if he was wrong. "Is it 100 gold?" "Oh. You think I'm a cheap old lady, don't you?" Aliyah teased. Then she leaned over and whispered in his ear, "It's 1,000. And you can spend every last bit of it every day if you want to, and it'll be filled again by the time you wake up in the morning." He stared down at the piece of plastic with the enchanted chip in the center. "How does that sound?" Aliyah asked him. He nodded. "Give me another hug before you go. The helicopter is waiting for you." Luke hugged her goodbye. He flew to school beside his mother in the back of the family's helicopter. It landed on the pad of a building near the school, and they walked the rest of the way together. "Did Grandma give you the SliceOfLife?" Jessica asked. "She did. I'll be careful with it. Don't worry. They are easy to replace if they get lost." "You don't seem excited." "Oh, I am," Luke said quickly. "She said it had 1,000 gold on it, and it would be refilled every day. If I wanted." "That's a lot of money," said Jessica. "Yes. Don't really spend 1,000 gold in a day without talking to me first. If you buy more toys than will fit in your rooms, you'll have to get rid of some of them." She held his hand most of the way, but when they reached the school she let him go in alone. He waved until the moment the doors shut between them. Then his smile fell. He was glad he had his own money now. He didn't have that many things he wanted, since Christmas had just happened and his birthday was coming. It was still a big present though, wasn't it? But she called me the least of the Volras. He hadn't been able to think of anything else on his whole way to school. Not even his nerves. Grandma said that. But she loves me. We played our game. Maybe. She didn't mean it. Maybe she meant the least in one specific way. Not the least. Probably, she meant it like that. Line of asterisks. School was wonderful. 3rd grade was the best thing that had ever happened to Luke Volra. After his fear of the other children faded, after his worries about whether or not bathroom breaks would be allowed were assuaged, he settled into life as a primary school student as if he'd been made for it. His teacher liked him. She complimented him on his art projects, his schoolwork, and his manners. When you followed the rules, she liked you even more, so he followed the rules very carefully. It was so easy. Much more importantly, the other children liked him. He had friends. Almost as soon as he arrived and just that easily. They weren't like the cousins. They were all his own age, and they didn't care about who would get chainer one day. They weren't always trying to beat each other at everything. And they didn't care that Luke wouldn't ever be an avowed. Mostly. A few people said things, but only a few. They played superheroes together at recess, and nobody told him he couldn't do it. He played, too. They asked if he wanted to play a chainer superhero, and he said, no. Water shaper. And since almost nobody else wanted to do that, Luke got to be the water shaper lots and lots. And he got to be a meister and an adjuster and a right and even, once, a brute. But the brute was supposed to run really fast or pick someone else up to make the game work, and he wasn't good enough at that to volunteer for a second round. It didn't matter. People liked him. Some of them even thought he was cool. His helicopter was cool. His stories about living on a boat were cool. His passion for the harp. Well, the teacher seemed to think it was cool. And everyone else thought it was interesting that he got pulled out of class 3 afternoons a week for special instruction with it. "Is it going to be your job?" a girl asked. "Like an instrument meister?" "Yes," said Lute. "I'm going to play all over the world." His plans for his future were developing every day, now that he was encountering so many questions about it. Almost nobody at home had ever mentioned Lute having a job, except for Olia's comment about how he could be second assistant. But in school, people talked about what they wanted to be when they grew up all the time. Encouraged by the overwhelming amount of acceptance, curiosity, and friendliness he'd encountered from his fellow third graders, Lute declared that he would be a famous musician. Like an instrument meister. And even if he traveled the world, he would come back home every night to have supper with his mother. The dream wasn't so different from most of the other students' goals. And when he finally revealed the secret truth Mrs. Yu had shared with him, the one he'd been careful never to let slip around his cousins so that they couldn't find anything mean to say, it only made the dream sound even brighter. "There's a list," he blurted out after a show and tell featuring his harp. He was standing in front of the classroom and fidgeting with the edge of his waistcoat. Every 9 years, not Earth years, the Artonan ranking board for large musical ensembles attends performances all over the triplanets and the resource worlds. And they make a list of all the best ones. The Artonans love to rank things. Everyone said so. Lute appreciated it in this case at least. To get them to visit your group, your planet has to nominate you. And then they come with Artonan experts and they meet with experts from your own species, and they study all kinds of things about the musicians. They even use magic to tell how much the audiences are enjoying the performances. After that, they make a list to let everyone know who the best musicians in the universe are. There were only 4 Earth groups in the top 27 last time. He paused for effect. None of them had an avowed musician in them. Not even one. And 2 of the groups have beaten the Anisidron Philharmonic every single time they've all been ranked. The All-Earth Symphony and the Vienna Philharmonic. Lute paused again, not intentionally this time. It was just so important to him. This one little fact. That means that the best musicians on Earth are ordinary humans. Like my parents and me. And I can be the best harpist in the world if I try hard enough. Even if I don't have magic. He looked hopefully around the classroom. Most of the faces were a little uncertain. One boy, who Lute would later discover had a mother in the Anisidron Philharmonic, seemed appalled. "Hey! That's neat," said Hoyu Zhangdamir from his desk at the front of the room. "If you become the best harpist in the world, I bet the Artonans might want to hear you play. You could get invited to other planets like we will." A few people were nodding. Yeah. He could do that. If you're the best on Earth, I bet they would summon you. "I don't think it's a summons if you're not avowed," someone said uncertainly. "Isn't it just a visit, then?" "It's almost the same. I want to buy a Ryabi single quotee the first time I get summoned. If Lute buys a Ryabi single quotee, it could fly beside his helicopter. He can go like us. Just like us." Lute stood before them, feeling as though he might burst from pride and relief. 3rd grade was wonderful. It was such a shame they all had to grow up. Line of asterisks. There were warning signs, but he didn't want to see them. Toward the end of 4th grade, games of superhero got more realistic. People wanted to talk about how classes actually worked. No more brutes turning people into goldfish. No more meisters who were also adjusters in secret. Then one day, Vandy Carrison said, "Let's all pretend to be what we really want to be when we're avowed." Everyone agreed. And then several pairs of eyes turned to Lute and looked at him differently than they had mere moments before. "It's fine, Lute," said a boy named Declan who he was particularly close to. "You can just be whatever. Maybe you can be the person we're saving today," a girl added. if we're all going to pretend it's really real." "Oh," said Loot. "Okay. I don't mind." He did. But minding wouldn't change anything. And there, my friends. Another pair of signs came that same year, in the form of new divisions in the grade. One was unique to Loot. He noticed it because shifts in his relationships with any of his friends caused him terrible anxiety. If someone was angry with him, he would flip and flop in his bed all night, wondering what he'd done wrong and how to fix it. But he couldn't fix this one. There had always been a few people who were not allowed to sleep over at any of Loot's houses or come for visits. It had never been a problem in 3rd grade. When someone told Loot their parents didn't want them visiting because of his family, he immediately thought, "I understand completely. The cousins will talk in Ortoman, so we can't understand them. Orpheus is always wandering around falling on top of people. Katie made me sit in the corner at the New Year party for no reason. And you never know when Hazel might be coming over." Now that he'd met teachers, made friends, and been a guest at other people's houses, he was more sure than ever that half of his relatives were completely horrible. And he had a lot of relatives, so half was a large number. Loot didn't consider someone disliking the other boys to be a deal-breaker, so he'd gotten along with the children who weren't allowed to attend sleepovers just fine. And they'd gotten along with him, too. Everyone knew that grown-ups sometimes made inconvenient rules you had to follow, and there were no hard feelings on either side. Someone would say, "Mom won't let me visit you on your boat even though I told her everyone else was going and you were my 5th best friend." And all the children would shake their heads, because, parents, right? What could you even do about people who didn't acknowledge the importance of the bond between 5th best friends? Slowly, that changed. The classmates who weren't allowed to visit him at home also started drawing away from him in school. They whispered things to each other that they'd overheard their parents say about his grandmother, or one of his other relatives. And instead of 5th best friends, they became, "My mom says your grandmother bribed the brute counselor to vote with her. My dad says your Uncle Corin slept with his ex-wife. My grandma says your grandma bought the rejuvenation slut out from under her, and that's why she can't have another baby until after 2039. So our families are enemies now. The blue name isn't taking care of me," Luke thought every time one of these accusations was leveled at him as if he were somehow personally responsible. "It's just stealing my friends." The second division that happened to everyone. All of a sudden, your parents' rank seemed to matter a lot more than it ever had before. Carlotta's parents were a B-rank brute and a C-rank rabbit. She'd always been friends with Vandy Carrison. Then she wasn't anymore. Instead, she was hanging around Loot a lot. He was happy for himself but sorry for her. "I said I'd go to high school with her when we both got selected. And we would share a room. And she said we couldn't do that. Because you're not going to be powerful enough to go to the same high school as Vandy," thought Loot. This kind of thing was much less confusing to him than the sudden dislike because of his name. But it was far more worrying. Because this was how the cousins were. Everyone talking about rank all the time. And thinking about it. And knowing that at the very bottom of them all, it won't be like that. It won't. "Don't worry about it," said Declan Zhao, leaning over to take one of the bonbons from the box on Luke's desk. He'd bought them with his Nusikert. He'd been buying snacks to share with everyone more often lately. Some people are acting like they're going to get chosen tomorrow. Vandy might not even be an S rank. She might not get to go to school in Apex. Anything can happen. Declan said not to worry about it, but he was getting really sensitive about rank, too. His mom was an A. And his dad was a D. That made it very hard to guess what he might be. Their class was starting to cluster up. High. Low. A couple like Declan who didn't know where they belonged. As the year ended and Luke cleaned out his desk to head home for the winter break, he was afraid he was on the verge of losing something. Line of asterisks. In 5th grade, they got several new students. Nilima Paragon Academy was expensive. Parents who couldn't really afford to send their children there sometimes chose to save up and wait until they were older so that they could take advantage of the middle school. Next year, when they moved out of the primary building, Their class would more than double in size. For now, it was just a few additions. One of them was Perky. He scurried around their new classroom, introducing himself to every single person, like he was on a mission to make sure he fit in as many handshakes as he could before morning announcements and meditation started. Lutz saw him coming and had just enough time to hope this went well before they were face to face. "Hi. I'm Khan. I live just a few blocks away from here. You can see the school from the roof of my building." "Which building does your family own?" Lutz asked politely. Khan's eyes widened. "No. We don't own a whole building. Just an apartment inside the building. My parents are ballet dancers and my brother's in 6th grade. We moved schools together this year." Lutz's interest was piqued. "Ballet dancers?" "I dance, too," said Khan. "In the youth ballet." "Youth ballet? A youth orchestra plays for you when you do nutcracker." Khan blinked. "It's not fair that the dancers can be so young but they won't let you join youth orchestra until you're 12, Lutz said. "I wanted to audition." He was ready for his first audition, but there weren't a lot of opportunities. Getting to 12 was taking ages. And to make matters worse, the nutcracker was always in December. Which meant Lutz would be nearly 13 before he could play in a proper orchestra at a proper ballet. He was sure there were other harpists getting ahead of him out there in the bigger world. "Do you play an instrument?" Khan asked. "All he can do is play harp," the girl whose grandma was waiting on a baby because of Aliyah called from across the room. "So he never shuts up about it." "Don't be mean," Tayet said. "Let's not be mean to each other." A boy snickered a little. Carlotta and Declan were nearby. They didn't say anything. Khan doesn't know yet, thought Lutz. For just a minute longer, he won't know about me. The matter suddenly felt urgent. "It's really nice to meet you," Lutz said quickly, holding out his hand. "I hope we can be friends. I brought snacks to share." Khan's bright smile brightened further. "Yeah. Let's be friends." By the end of the day, Konstantin was friends with everyone in the class, but Lutz still considered it a success. On the way to the helipad that afternoon, he ended up standing behind Khan and a taller boy who looked a lot like him while they waited to cross the street. It must have been the older brother. He was wearing one of the middle school blazers. Lutz was about to say hello, when Khan suddenly piped up. "Guess what? There's a boy in my class who's not avowed." "You're 10, said the brother. "Nobody in your class is avowed." Khan groaned. "You know what I mean. He's not going to be avowed. His parents aren't." "Seriously?" the brother asked in a surprised voice. "Well, it doesn't matter in 5th grade. I'm sure his family will send him to another school next year." "Why?" "The same reason we're going to school here now, Khan. Paragon's got so many high ranks in one spot. My classes are really different from last year. SNA kids are everywhere, instead of there being just a few of us in a mix of everyone else. We're starting selection prep lessons earlier than they would in our old school. It's nice for us, but it would make class really weird for him, wouldn't it? He'll just hang out with the lows, right?" The brother shrugged. "I'm not sure it works like that. The probable low ranks in my grade seemed kind of different than last year, too. Anyway, if he goes to a big school instead, there are bound to be a few other kids like him." Lutz let them go ahead of him without ever speaking up. "There's a boy in my class who's not avowed," he thought. Khan could have said anything. But he said that. It wasn't a shock. When Lutz compared himself to other people, that was the first thing he always thought, too. This afternoon it just hurt more than it had in a while. That was all. There are other things about me. There are so many other things to say. 5th grade was the year he went silent. It was natural, a reflex born of 1,000 Vora holidays and parties. There was a family event nearly every week, sometimes more than one, and when Lutz was forced to attend them because they were happening in his current residence, they almost always were. He was quiet. If you were loud, people commented on you. If you protested when the cousins said something mean, then they realized they'd hurt you. They knew what to say next time. He was getting too old to run and tell his mother or his grandmother. They would put a stop to it, But then he was a tattletale, and even the cousins who hadn't been bothering him would get mad. Strangely, over the holidays, he'd been accused more than once of thinking he was better than the rest of them. Because he lived with Sleyca. Being quiet, he had learned, would get you through 3/4 of all family events without incident. And being quiet was what he started doing at school, too. He didn't talk about his music. He didn't talk about his things. He ignored thoughtless comments about what he wasn't. So many of those. At the same time, he couldn't ignore the fact, anymore, that a few of his friends were only staying friendly because they liked his houses. In a school full of rich kids, he was the richest, and it was just a little too obvious that when he invited them over, they only wanted to spend time with his stuff, not with him. One of them even admitted that his parents had told him to be nice to Loot because of his family. And then there was Declan Zhao, who alternated between being Loot's best friend on the weekends and being a jerk who didn't want the high ranks to see him hanging out with Loot at school. It wasn't all terrible, though. 5th grade was the most exciting year for students at Paragon. They all looked forward to it for the same reason, and as the year-end approached, even Loot had to start making noise, because you couldn't bottle up so much pure eagerness without exploding. At the end of 5th grade, when they were still young enough that most countries were happy to treat them like non-threats and just old enough that the adults didn't think they'd be completely impossible to manage, the school arranged the trips. 3 weeks. 3 whole weeks worth of days spent away from the island, in the rest of the world. They would travel to the TC every morning. And from there they would teleport, many of them for the first time ever, away to a new place on Earth. They would see rivers, mountains, more than one barren desert which everyone agreed was really boring and unfortunate. They were repeatedly reminded not to brag about this to any friends they might have in other schools, since this sort of thing was very impossible to implement on a nationwide scale. Loot heard the teachers calling it the annual madness. And in the weeks leading up to it, their travel schedule changed almost daily, sending the class into cries of joy or dismay as they learned what the efforts of their parents, their school, and their government had wrought. People got strange as the date of the trip approached. Not Loot, though. He was totally sane about it. "Do not betray me, Vienna," he whispered, bowing his head over his desk each morning and holding his palms skyward in supplication. "Ich liebe dich, Österreich." He's praying to Austria again. I think it's more like he's trying to cast a spell on it. "Oh, beautiful Zambezi, I have always wanted to see Victoria Falls. I promise not to jump in. Now Everly's talking to a river. Maybe we should do it, too. You think? Istanbul did cancel our day there because the hero team said they were worried about protests. Hoy was really disappointed. Hello, Machu Picchu. Some of my ancestors were born in Peru. Line of asterisks. He got to go to Austria. The night before he left, hiding under his blankets at his father's place, Luke stared at pictures on a realtor's website on his phone. He picked out an apartment for himself there, a little loft with lots of sunshine near the metro. He knew it probably wasn't going to be for sale when he was finally old enough to emigrate, but it was still fun to imagine it. And to spot it from the street the next day when they were on a walking tour, surrounded by a fleet of guides and protectors impersonating guides. He hid his passport band under his sleeve and pretended he was a local who'd just wandered into the middle of this group of future avowed by accident. He did it any time their trips took them to a city. Here, he wasn't the odd one out. Every person on the street, every soul in every building, they were like him. For me, this is the real world, he decided. I'm not alone. I'm just waiting to get here. He would convince his mom to come with him. There was no reason she couldn't. Line of asterisks. Luke started 6th grade quiet. Safe. Ignorable. He didn't really have friends anymore. The last of them, the ones who he'd annoyed by trying a little too hard to keep. Oh my god, you guys, Luke Valra is so clingy, had evaporated over the holidays. They were all joining clubs and doing extracurriculars now. Not the kind of clubs Luke could just insert himself into. Write up apprenticeships. Martial arts for future meisters. Brute scouts. Heroes of the future. It wasn't like he wouldn't be allowed to participate. They couldn't officially discriminate against him, and he was sure the adults would mostly force everyone to behave around him. But there was nothing quite like being the person in the room everyone was forced to be considerate of. It just made them go from being a little mean to you to really hating you. This is better, he thought from his spot at the back of the room. I just keep my head down. Be polite to everyone. Asked Mom if I can have a top-of-the-line concert harp for my birthday next week. I can have it professionally painted. Purple would be fun. Also, purple didn't belong to anyone else. Avowed classes didn't officially have associated colors and symbology, but people liked to team up, so it was a thing in some settings. If you went into a neighborhood, you'd see the gray flag with the Artonian symbol for the mind on it here and there. Brutes were red with the symbol for the body. Green for meisters. Brown or light blue or both done in stripes for shapers. They couldn't seem to settle the matter. It wasn't something he'd ever thought much about, but the colors were all the rage now that they were in 6th grade. If someone wore a red bracelet or a green hairband, all of his classmates had decided it had to mean things. They were getting superstitious about it in ways that even Grandma Alia would have found ridiculous. And she had recently invited a cab driver to dinner with them because when she'd cast her last giant lockwood chain, before Lute was even born, the cabbie had picked her up twice in one night. She was still checking in on him every year or so to see if she could figure out what the universe was trying to tell her about him. Mom, that's weird, isn't it? Lute had whispered after she came to check on him and tuck him in that night. Most people think so, Jessica said with a smile. But Grandma doesn't believe in letting things go once they've caught her eye. Anyway, 6th grade had hit Lute's classmates with what he could only describe as system fever, and they were making the cab driver thing seem completely normal. He looked up from his desk at the sound of a squeal from the opposite corner, and sure enough. Tiet. Your earrings are green. Does that mean you want to be a meister now? Soon all the meister hopefuls were welcoming her to the fold. Like it was all set in stone, even though people were still changing their minds every day and nothing was guaranteed. Lute had to change the case on his cell phone from red to black so that people would stop asking if he wanted to be a brute. It was just a joke, but none of them seemed to care that he didn't think it was funny. Dark purple. That would be a cool color for a harp. And for his party this year. He looked around the room. There were people who would come. Most people would probably come, if he made it an epic Vilrabash. They didn't all hate him, they just didn't have anything in common with him now that they were getting older and starting to care about things he couldn't be involved in. No. I'll do it like I used to. On the yacht, as long as Hazel wasn't there. Her family liked to take it over these days. No kids. Just me, Mom, Amy if she's free, the crew, and a cake. He wouldn't invite Alia. It was her boat. She'd be there or she wouldn't. Lute couldn't even remember the last time they'd played their fashion game. When he asked his mother about the party, she promised to set it up. If not on the yacht, then at the Midtown apartment. Then she added, "You'll have to go to Hazel's birthday party next month, remember?" "I do?" Lute asked, not bothering to keep the horror out of his voice. "Why?" They were sitting together in the white parlor, eating burgers from a place they both liked but almost never visited. Lute pretended not to know why, but he did. It was a crowded fast food restaurant in Apex. Full of high ranks. His mom didn't like to go places like that with Lute, because the presence of the S-rank bodyguards didn't make crowds of high ranks just a little nervous, the way it did down in F. If they weren't a little nervous, they made comments sometimes. Lute thought it would be all right. There was nothing so terrible they could say that he couldn't ignore it. But she didn't like it, so he never complained about reheated burgers and fries not being quite as good. "Hazel wants me at her party?" Hazel's birthday parties had often swept him up when he was little. Now that they were older, he was delighted not to be invited. This year she had a set of teenage friendish people she had somehow obtained despite the fact that when she wasn't off doing very important things on the true planets with whoever it was the Chainer family members worked for, she was virtually always being tutored by their grandmother or someone else. The wound left in Hazel's pride from being forced to apologize to Lute after the whiff jokes had festered rather than healing. And he wasn't really interested in forgiveness either. Avoidance was the only thing that kept peace in the household whenever she was around, and she was around so often that avoiding her meant Lute sometimes went days without showing his face to the people he lived with except at mealtimes. "It's her 14th birthday, Lute," said Jessica. "Does that mean something?" Jessica smoothed the front of her skirt over her legs. "She's having her coming-of-age party this year." Lute narrowed his eyes. "You, Lute. It's a whole year early. This is just a plot so that she can have a second giant ball when she turns 15. I'm not wearing a tuxedo and learning a dance for her until she's actually the right age." Jessica cleared her throat. "The theme she's chosen is Royal Ascot. So you'll wear a full morning suit and top hat. And there won't be a dance." "What's Royal Ascot?" "It's a horse race. In England." Lute considered that. Horses might make it okay. He hadn't had many opportunities to interact with horses. "Can't I feed them?" "It will be a series of brute races. At the big track in F, racehorses won't last long enough to provide entertainment for the whole length of the party." She paused. "You can offer the brute snacks if you like." Jessica grinned. "You can hold out carrots and sugar lumps for them." "Hazel will probably relate to something like that," Lute grumbled. He was wrong. What she did on the day of the party was so much worse. Chapter 111 Line of Asterisks Pandora Anthropodrome February 23, 2037 9:17 p.m. Line of Asterisks Lute was trying to do his homework in the most isolated spot of the most isolated pavilion at one of the most ridiculous family parties he'd ever been to when the guest of honor found him. He was in a cream-colored morning suit with a matching top hat. For some unfathomable reason, all male family members had also been ordered to carry decorative walking sticks. His stick was lying on the ground in front of the white folding chair he was sitting in. He tried to ignore the patter of clay on the pavilion roof. It was a strange kind of rain, created by men and women running faster than horses could have dreamed around the massive earthen track. The clay rain was supposed to be part of the experience somehow, but it was just worrying him because what if the transparent barriers between them and the track edge gave out? What if some brute speedster lost control of their powers and smashed through the tent, killing themselves and some of the people here? On top of that, his homework sucked. He was memorizing the human morality clauses. Because they were in middle school, and it was time for them to prepare for the day when they would all be avowed. A lot of his classes were now avowed-focused in a way that they hadn't been before. Imagine you are a speedster running to catch the train. Your top safe speed with your skills fully activated and your spell impressions aiding you is 198 km/h. You are 19 standard F city blocks away. If the train is approaching the station at 50 km/h and is only 1 block away. Now Lute was slouching in his seat beside the crumbs of a sticky toffee pudding that had been decorated with an unappetizing amount of gold leaf, and here came the birthday girl. It was garbage on top of garbage on top of a perfectly rotten day. Quiet. If I'm just quiet and polite, it'll be fine. Biting his tongue had been working at school so far. Just the other day, someone had sniffed him in the hallway. One of the new kids Lute started attending this year so that they could have the pre-selection avowed prep experience at a fancier middle school. There were so many students like that, and he was much funnier to them than he was to the people he'd spent the past few years growing up with. And the fact that they found him so funny seemed to be making it more alright for some of the ones he had grown up with too. Anyway, Lute knew what the sniffing joke was, but he pretended not to. So only a couple of people had laughed, and then it had died out. It was fine. "There you are," said Hazel. She was being trailed by a couple of her friendish people and a few of the weak cousins who were too far from Alliance graces to be bitter about her position in the way the more talented family members were. The boys were in their top hats and morning suits. The girls were all in dresses and big hats. There was a lot of lace and ribbons going on. Why on earth would they come over here to bother me? Lute wondered. There is a live band. There are avowed running around in circles to watch. She's got a fireworks launch every 15 minutes. I can't even be in the top 20 most interesting things here. Hello, Hazel, he said. Happy birthday. You too, she said brightly. Turning to the others, she added, Luke's birthday was last month. He turned 12. He didn't have a party. I didn't want a party, Luke muttered. Then he berated himself because that wasn't being quiet. That was arguing. He wouldn't do it again. If I'm just quiet, she'll get bored. Her friends were already bored. Hazel had led them here, but for 3 or 4 minutes, it seemed like she was just chatting with Luke. Or at Luke. And he couldn't imagine what she was getting out of it. For a moment, he actually had to entertain the fact that she might be trying to be nice to him. She was declaring to the world that she would be coming of age this year, which was just absurd. But maybe she was trying to be adult by coming to visit him in his lonely corner and make amends. Then Hazel suddenly said, even though Luke didn't have a party, he wanted Libra all to himself for his birthday. Aunt Jessica begged grandmother to give it to him, so my family had to leave even though we were vacationing on it last month. I've been so busy on the true planets with our family's friends that I needed a rest. But I didn't mind giving up the yacht at all, of course. Not to you, Luke. Luke stared at her. You got thrown off the yacht? For me? Nobody had told him that. His mother had said they'd have his little get-together of favorite adults at the apartment if Libra wasn't available. He'd just assumed it had been available. Luke's birthday was January 22nd. Hazel said Libra was supposed to be her family's for the month. Had Jessica really gotten them kicked off a whole week early? Hugh, Katie, Corin, Orpheus, Hazel. All of them? Well, maybe not Orpheus. He drifted around. There was no guarantee he was with the rest of them. We left, Hazel said tightly. For you. Because we understand you don't have friends other than the crew and you have difficulties. They got kicked off. For me. He smiled. Just a little. Grandma Alaya is modeling our family after some concepts she likes from our tone in history and culture, Hazel said, taking off her wide-brimmed white hat and setting it on the table behind Luke. So it all makes sense to me now. Hold on, let me perform a word chain. Luke didn't roll his eyes, but it took a lot of effort. Hold on, let me perform a word chain, was practically Hazel's catchphrase. She whipped them out periodically to show off how many she knew. She spoke in her tone. Her hands flicked around. Luke assumed she was doing it correctly because she usually was. When she was done, she sighed. There. Much better. That one enhanced my ability to perceive certain things visually. It's the 14th word chain I've cast on my 14th birthday. For luck. Wow. 14. Said a guy who had to be 3 years older than the rest of them. Hazel smiled at him. Gross. Is he her boyfriend? She looked back at Luke. As I was saying, it all makes sense now. Why Grandma keeps you and Aunt Jessica with her all the time and why she does favors for you that she wouldn't do for most of the family members. It's because you're the assistants. My mom's her assistant, Luke said. I'm just her grandson. Hazel was staring at his face with her somehow enhanced eyes. No, I mean, you're like a wizard's assistants. Both of you. The wizard class is supposed to protect the non-wizard class, and they take especially good care of their assistants. They give them a home to live in. And clothes to wear. And they give them gifts all the time. I have to argue after all. Hazel, that's what families do, too. Grandma gives you clothes to wear and a yacht to live on, and she gives you gifts all the time. I don't know everything about our tone and culture, but I've lived on Earth for a while. Sharing things with your relatives is normal. He was glad her attempt to get back at him for the yacht ousting was so pitiful. Yes, of course it is, Hazel said. But you're different. Want to see? Suddenly, Luke sensed danger. Hazel did stupid things sometimes because she had no sense of something important most people had. A sense of consequence maybe. But she wasn't stupid. And she'd brought over witnesses. She was confident that she was right about this insane Artonan assistant thing. She thought Luke had gotten something that was supposed to be hers because of an alien version of What was that phrase he'd heard his grandmother say a couple of times? Beatnik? No, that wasn't it. That was just a random memory of Aliyah resurfacing. Noblesse oblige, he thought. That one. Hazel, I'm doing my homework. He tried not to let his nerves show. They must have anyway. Never mind. The corners of Hazel's lips turned up. I can tell you don't want to hear this. The last time I told you the truth about what people said about you, you cried. That was wrong of me. Assistants are supposed to be protected from painful information. Luke stood. You're cracked, he spat. Why can't you leave me alone? Roman barely notices I exist. Mio asked me if I still play piano at Christmas. None of the important cousins care about me at all. You know who bothers me at school? It's mostly not the future S-ranks, Hazel. You act like an F. This was an insult based entirely on Luke's lived experience. Hazel probably didn't even understand it, but it was true. Lexi Roberts had actually implied it over a year ago, when he doubted Khan's assertion that Luke would be able to get along with the low ranks. Luke was at the very bottom, and the people who were most aware of that were not the members of his class who were aiming for apex. They'd already left him so far behind that he'd have had to scream in their faces to remind them he was still alive. It was painful. But with the exception of those high-ranked children who had a specific grievance with his family, the kids who saw him and snickered about him and sniffed the whiff, were the ones who felt like they were being left behind, too. Just like the cousins. Exactly like them. The cousins who were always the most eager to start speaking languages he didn't know and talking about things he'd never be able to do were the people who were hoping they'd end up as season Bs. Hazel was the chosen one. She had no business being so obsessed with Luke's business. You're pathetic, he said. You're so used to getting first you can't stand to come in second for a single moment. The only reason you care about me at all is because I live with Grandma and you're afraid that means she might take 3 seconds out of her month to look at me instead of you. I'm pathetic. Hazel scoffed. She looked around at her friends for support. Me? I spend hours every day with Grandma Aliyah. I spend days on the triplanets every month. I don't need to worry about you. I just pity you. Your birthday party is the stupidest thing ever. The theme is weird. Morning suits are for daytime. You've got brutes instead of horses. And you're 14. Coming-of-age parties aren't 15. Were you so busy doing mysterious things on the triplanets you forgot how to count, or did you just want us all to lick your feet a few extra times? At this, a couple of her hangers-on did look uncomfortable. I might be chosen at 14, Hazel said, running her hands over the sides of her white lace dress. If I am, this will be my only chance to have a coming-of-age party. Luke gave her a blank look. He's a little bit right, Cousin Yuma said unexpectedly. She was wearing a peach dress with a big tulle flower on the hip. My parents were saying the same thing on the way over here. Hazel rounded on her. They weren't saying it mean. Like he just did. With the feet licking. They were just saying that nobody in the family has ever been a pre-15 selectee. Orpheus was the earliest, wasn't he? 15 years, 51 days. You don't think I can beat Orpheus? He started dosing himself with potions the second he made it to the triplanets. He's going to get fired. Did you even know an avowed could be fired? You're not getting picked at 14, said Luke. It's not unlikely I will be, said Hazel, turning back to him. Even Grandma says so. Her fake smile had dropped. Her confidence at being surrounded by her friends seemed to have faded, too. She looked peeved. The system hates making outliers, Luke said. That's why they're outliers. Only a few people get chosen before 15 each year, and some of them are usually U-types. You can't count them. Everything about them is strange. Hazel is unique, the person who might have been a boyfriend said, glaring at Luke. There's nobody else like her on all of Zedora. So there's no reason to think she won't be chosen at 14. The Gloom was selected at 14 years, 287 days. Rim was chosen at 14 years, 300 days. Nia, oh he's one of those, Luke thought as he droned on. He didn't just have the selection dates of hyperboles memorized. If he was bringing up Nia, he'd gone and memorized all the significant S's on the island, too. He wondered how long it would be before his classmates started doing this kind of thing. Sanj was picked at 13 years, 311 days, Hazel announced, apparently miffed that the boyfriend hadn't included her genetic father. He's a you, though, thought Lute. And a massive outlier. That was kind of my point. He's a you, though, said Yuma, as if she's read Lute's mind. You can't be a you, Hazel. Hazel's expression turned even more irritated. I just came over here to say hello, she ground out. Since Lute didn't even come greet me on my birthday. I'm done now. Let's go. Amazing, thought Lute as she stalked away with her posse trailing after her. She even forgot to prove her point, whatever it was. It looked like she was heading for the towering confection of silver and gold boxes that was the gift table. Everyone had been told to stick to certain wrapping guidelines for their presents so that they wouldn't clash with the decor. Then she suddenly turned around, and leaving her friends behind, she stalked back toward Lute. He watched her cautiously. My hat, she muttered, reaching over him to grab it. She perched it back on top of her head. You're such a spoiled brat. You can't even let me enjoy my coming of age. And you're so stupid you don't know anything. I don't know why I talk to you. Lute opened his mouth. Aunt Jessica will pick up whatever any other member of the family drops, Hazel whispered in his ear. My dad and mom said so, and I watched, and it's true. He could tell she thought she was saying something awful to him, but... What does that mean? He asked in spite of his own better judgment. Even when she is not working. Even if there are servants around. If anyone else in the family makes a mess, she cleans it. Because she knows she's the assistant. It's not just her job. It's what she is. Lute was cold all over. Maybe the under-table heaters had stopped working. You think my mom's not a family member because she tidies up. That doesn't even make sense. Watch. You'll see. She straightened again. The expression on her face smoothed. And another thing, I wasn't going to mention this one because it's just awful, but... Family members? We get sluts with a rejuvenator. They've all been booked and contracted for the next several years. I asked Grandma Alaya to give my mom one, and she did. 6 years from now. Your mom? She hasn't ever had one. And she's still not booked for one. Do you know why? Wait, thought Lute. Stop talking. Stop. His head was spinning. He felt like he was going to faint. I bet you do. I bet you have noticed. Family members, if they're even a tiny bit important to Grandma, get to stay young. That's half the reason other people hate us. Because we take up tons of sluts with the healers who have the rejuve talents. Hazel exhaled sharply through her nose. You and Jessica get lots of things for being the family's assistants. But you don't get that. Because there's not enough of it to go around. And, well, it doesn't really hurt the bloodline, does it? If your mom gets too old to make more kids like you. Lute was too overwhelmed to speak. There was no retort. He watched Hazel leave in a daze. The band was playing a mambo song suddenly. Most of the family, friends, and random Alaya-invited guests were cheering on their favorite brutes as they lapped the track again. Clay spattered onto the pavilion roof. Hazel walked straight over to Cousin Katsuro, one of Amy's brothers. He was talking to Jessica and drinking a glass of the imitation champagne that tasted so terrible Lou couldn't imagine the real stuff was anything like it. Hazel bumped into his arm. The glass tumbled from his hand into the grass. Maybe he would have bent down to pick it up himself, but before he could, Luke's mother dove for it. They said something to each other. She patted Katsuro on the arm. She nodded to Hazel. Then she hurried over to the mocktail bar to fetch him another drink. Hazel turned around, looked back at Luke, and smiled. I ran away from the Royal Ascot party, Luke said casually. For some reason, I left my homework behind and took 2 puddings with me instead. Once again, Alden had no idea what to say. The remains of the trail mix was spread on the table between them. They'd eaten out all the dark chocolate and nuts, and now there were a bunch of raisins left. The sticky toffee ones covered in all that gold leaf, Luke added. They were individual serving sizes. I don't even remember going to pick them up. One minute, I was in my chair watching Hazel smile at me, and the next I was on a train, holding 2 puddings on these little gold plates. I wonder if I wanted to hit her with them. He mused. Maybe I grabbed the puddings, planning to smash them into her face in front of 200 people and a band playing Latin music, but then I just left instead. I ended up at Cyril's place. I told him I'd brought the pudding for him. Of course, she got a second coming-of-age party the next year. What was the theme for that one? Alden wondered. I can't believe people memorize exactly how old other avowed were when they got selected, he said. Down to the day. Really? To me it feels like a natural extension of everything else. The soon-to-be superlunacy that takes people over as their big birthdays approach is something to behold when you think it doesn't apply to you at all. Luke crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back. By 7th grade, I was starting to hate everything about it so much. On this side of it, I can see that I was unreasonable in some ways. A lot of what upset me was just unavoidable for everyone. But after an entire year of people ignoring me, teasing me, or talking endlessly about all the cool things in their lives and their futures that I thought I couldn't take part in, I was done with the whole country. I wanted it to vanish like Atlantis. I did get an early audition with a youth orchestra in 6th grade, though. I was so tired of waiting, I went and asked, and it turned out they weren't that serious about the age limit. It was just like, yeah, sure. Come on. Whatever. He pursed his lips. And Zedora sucks that way. For someone like I was. Teenagers tend not to have really serious hobbies unrelated to their future dream class. And in a lot of cases, the way people practice for those dream classes is different from how an unavowed would practice for the nearest equivalent. So there really wasn't anything for someone my age who wanted to get to the next level as a musician. I just had to stick with tutors. People who want to be instrument meisters don't study music? Alden asked. They study music, Luke said. But they're encouraged to try different types of instrument instead of focusing too much on one. Youth orchestra is really just for them to see if they like playing in a group. The thing is, even if they know what subclass they want, there's no guarantee that the system will offer something similar, or that their families will be able to get it for them. And musical instrument meisters aren't particularly common either. So the teachers and directors try to make sure they're falling in love with music and the lifestyle of an avowed musician, but they discourage them from getting too into any one thing. They want them to play around and get ideas for lots of different futures. It makes sense. He raised an eyebrow, then added, it also means most of them are kind of terrible before they get chosen. And afterward they don't have quite the right mindset, in my opinion. You're saying that instrument meisters don't have the right mindset for being musicians? Alden grinned at him. All right. I'm extremely snobby about this, Luke said. I admit it. And my snobbishness is actually why I decided I wouldn't mind being friendly with Lexi around the same time. He was one of the only people in our entire school other than me who had an artistic hobby he was actually devoted to instead of just killing time with. The ballet stuff? Luke nodded. It's just his personality, I think. He can't stand to half-ass whatever he starts. If his parents had given him a hockey stick or a paintbrush when he was little, he'd have done those things instead. But they were dancers, so they put him in dance classes, and that's what he turned all of his perfectionism toward while he was waiting for what came next. Is he talented? I'm a musician, not a dancer. But he was a lot better than the other kids were. I heard he was dancing with a community ballet of adults a little last year. Avowed adults. I'm sure they were way more casual and nothing like his parents' company, but that still had to be next level. And then he just quit, said Alden. To spend more time with his whip, Luke agreed. I mean, of course he did. You can only be a perfectionist in so many different directions at once, and the hero program was always his goal. Is he good with it in gym? I think he is. It wasn't easy for Alden to tell because he had no idea how difficult Rather might be to use. When Lexi practiced picking up small objects with it in the apartment, he had a tendency to cut them in half instead of lifting them. He seems really good at changing its length, phasing it, and slicing. I think he might be having trouble with aiming the tip and controlling its general danger level. But that still seems impressive to me. He's only had it a few months. I knew he was going to pick Meister, but I still can't believe he chose to have an Ertonen chain whip linked to his brain. That was kind of ballsy. I pictured him with something much more traditional. Like a sword. My class at selection was Meister. Luke looked startled. How did you end up with Chainer, then? I traded into it. Ha! Said Lute. That means Corin's office screwed up. They should have been glued to the class trade system. Or it was luckier for you to hand-deliver it to them for some reason? Or someone whose family hated my head, and they would never have sold it to us. But they didn't want to force their kid to take it either. In that case, you'd think they would sell it to someone else who hated us, though. Alden had thought about Andre a bit since coming to Chelena North. Luke's comment just cemented his opinion. I assumed the person who gave it to me was offloading it before their family found out they had been chosen. I think they were afraid they would be forced to take it themselves if someone knew. Ooh. A clan of extreme Vulrivis likers then. Those are fun. They came out of the woodwork when I was in 7th grade and all their offspring turned extra monstrous for a while. Why then? Luke's eye shot skyward. Alaya ran for re-election. You wouldn't think it would be that bad since she was on the council for ages. You'd think they'd have gotten used to her, right? But no. They dug up old family news and pretended it was just as shocking as the day it happened. About halfway through the year I tried to quit, actually. School? I asked for private instruction, like I'd had when I was little. Like almost all the Bulwer kids get. It had gotten to the point where I thought I could withstand my relatives better than some of my classmates. Total reversal, I know. He stopped leaning and let the legs of his chair hit the floor with a clack. Jessica said no. She wanted me to stay in school. Line of asterisks, Neelima Paragon Academy July 19, 2038 7:46 a.m. Line of asterisks. The wind was freezing, and the sky was still dark as Luke climbed the steps up to the front doors of the middle school building. I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I'm doing this, he thought, as he clutched at his scarf with a gloved hand and stared down at his shoes. I can't believe I announced I was leaving like some kind of drama lord on Friday. Why didn't I just stay quiet? It was in his second science class of the day. Biology. That one went off the rails a lot, and the teacher always let it go too far before he stepped in. He was a brown-nose who always wanted to pick the right side, and he could never figure out which of his illustrious young about to suck up to at any given moment. Things had to explode before he said some tepid thing like, "Now quiet down, everyone. We're all friends here." Why didn't I just stay quiet? Wasn't the plan to stay quiet? The door handle felt icy even through his glove. He pulled it open and headed down the hall, trying to hide behind his scarf. They'd called his mother a mule. Declan was a terrible comedian who couldn't even make his jokes work without a minute-long explanation and follow-up, but still. You know how horses and donkeys make mules? And mules are barren? Well, maybe if a human and an Ertonen make a mule, the mule can't ever do magic. The Lute's mom is half Ertonen bullshit had been all over the school since before the election. The votes had been cast now. Alaya had won. Why wasn't it going away? We used to be friends. He came to my sleepovers. Mom was nice to him. Lute didn't understand what was so enthralling about the half-Ertonen rumors anyway. There were other people who had similar features. There were people who begged the system or their surgeons for similar features. Everyone knew alien-human hybrids weren't a thing. We were in a biology classroom surrounded by books and computers that said they weren't a thing. Lute had snapped. He had stood up and told the whole classroom full of his peers not to expect him back on Monday. So long, you psychos. I hate you all, and I'm looking forward to never seeing a single one of you again. He'd been 100% confident that his mom would let him quit school if he told her he was being bullied. It wasn't like they couldn't afford tutors for him. It wasn't like he'd get a worse education at home. he'd get a better one. The classes at Paragon were excellent for most of the people here. But now that they were older, so much of the day was focused on the triplanets, the contract, system theory, superhuman history. At home, with his own program, he could skip all of that pre-avowed crap and focus on things people learned in the real world. A literature class would be cool. Paragon didn't even have those. He'd been so certain, he'd cleaned out his locker. Now he was trudging toward it with a loaded backpack to fill it back up again. If Anzidora wasn't an island, he would already have run away. He tried not to meet anyone's eyes as he hastily shoved everything back into the locker. Good morning, Loot. Constantine. 2 lockers over. He had never said a single cruel thing to Loot. He never would. It just wasn't his personality. He'd even tell people to knock it off, sometimes, if they said something completely awful by his standards. A lot like Vandy. A lot like Tayet. A lot like a lot of nice people who didn't want to see something too bad happen right in front of them. But it ended there. Con had friends over all the time. He put together groups to go hang out at Rosa Grove. Sometimes Declan Zhao was in those groups. Loot never was. Good morning, said Loot. In classes, he was quiet. At lunch, he sat alone. He made it through another week. And another. One more. They had an ongoing pen pal assignment with students in Canada. Loot's Canadian was depressed that she was Loot's Canadian. All the other people in her class got to have video calls and send emails to future avowed. The instructor announced that they would start rotating pen pals. Everyone knew why. Honestly, said Carlotta. You knew what she wanted to hear. Why didn't you just lie and say you were one of us? The rest of us were having fun getting to know people and now we have to swap. She doesn't mean it like that, said Hoyu. It might be fun to swap. I did mean it like that, she said. She stalked away. Well, Hoyu said, sounding uncomfortable. Her older sister just got D. She's stressed out. Yes, it must be so stressful for her, said Loot, loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear him. Just imagine how horrible it must be to get D when you're expecting C. I think I'd cry my eyes out every day if I wound up as a lowly D, don't you? It wasn't quite fair. He knew he was being a little bit of an asshole, too. But he felt less like a ghost after he'd said what was on his mind. Without meaning to, he kept doing it. A retort here. A waspish remark there. It didn't feel like he was doing it very often at all. Every minute of every day, someone was stabbing him. On purpose. Accidentally. And the ones who weren't stabbing him were ignoring the ones who were 90% of the time. Will the world really come to an end, he wondered, if I just stopped trying so hard to stay out of everyone's way? He took Angela Aubergine to the school talent show. They each got 3 minutes. He played his song. The biology teacher was the one who was giving everyone the signal to get off stage. Luke looked at him, and he suddenly realized. That guy will wait ages before he walks out here and actually makes me move. He kept playing. There was no grand plan. He had no delusions that anyone would think he was cool for this. They didn't even like the harp. They thought classical music was dull. He could have played something popular to try to win a few of them over, but he didn't. Arranging Handel's Suite in D minor for himself was his current project. He cared about it. He had to listen to what they cared about every second of every day. They could listen to him for a change. I am good at this, he thought as he plucked the strings with more vigor than Handel might have wanted. I have made myself good at this. You're all so proud of what a magic spell is going to turn you into. One day, I'm going to be the best harpist in the world. Maybe that's not as spectacular as what you'll all be. But at least I'm going to earn it for myself. The stage lights were getting hot. Luke Fuller was getting angry. When the biology teacher finally stomped onto the stage and tried to touch Angela, Luke quit. The auditorium was full of people giggling or staring at him with wide eyes. This is inappropriate behavior, Luke. You need to apologize to all of us. Oh, though Luke. I've actually made him mad. He didn't look that mad when they were torturing me in class the other day. Why? Luke asked. I think you know why. You took 5 times as long as students are allowed. That's because I'm 5 times as talented as the rest of them, said Lute. You didn't, said Alden. On stage in front of the whole school? It felt so good, said Lute. Even as I said it, I knew it was social suicide. But I was already socially dead, and I'd begun to snap, and I kind of wanted to be expelled. I was so calm about it while I sat in the principal's office. They expelled you for playing the harp for 15 minutes and talking back to a teacher? Of course not. They just called my parents. They regretted that because Alaya showed up instead of Jessica or Cyril. I was shocked. The principal was shocked. I think my bio teacher almost pissed himself. I'd never gotten in trouble like that, so I didn't realize that my grandmother was even available for Lute's screw-ups. I'm sure the academy didn't either. But my parents didn't involve themselves at school much. Even when I was in 3rd grade. Cyril couldn't getting along with the other parents, and I guess Jessica knew people might tease me. And? Power, you know. Nobody treats Alaya like she's less than them. Was she mad at you? Lute sighed. She was very amused. When they told her what I'd done, she said, well, were you 5 times better than the rest of them? It didn't endear me to the faculty. That's for sure. And my refusing to be a doormat phase didn't win me any friends. I was mad at all of them, you know. I was almost more angry at the people who weren't heinous. People can tell when you're mad at them, and it offends them, and they stop feeling even a little sorry for you, and then it just... 7th grade sucked so bad. Declan Zhao was evil. So were a few of the others. Unless the system installed one hell of an empathy patch in their twisted brains when it gave them their powers, they were going to grow up to be supervillains. Terrorists, animal abusers, politicians in favor of a zero-human Anzidora, something like that. Deciding they were evil helped. Luke despised them, and he still braced himself as he walked through the doors of the building, trying to prepare for whatever terrible thing would be funny to them that week. But even though they could still hurt him, he was no longer hurt by the fact that they wanted to hurt him. Evil was what they were. What else could you expect from them? An evil person nicknaming you quadruple decimal because your chance of being granted powers was 4 decimal places to the right of 0 wasn't surprising. It was like a leech sucking your blood. Or like Hazel screaming at you to stop playing while she was chaining because she was 15 now and she had mere days left to practice before she became one of the most powerful creatures on Earth. It was just what they did. You could hate it, but you couldn't be surprised by them anymore. What hurt his feelings the most lately was all the others, the ones who weren't evil. The friendly ones. Who still didn't really want to be his friend. Well, I guess, he thought one morning in November as he sat down at his desk, I am an inconvenient person to be friends with. My family is complicated. We'll only be in school together for a couple more years before they'll head off to the avowed high schools. My own life goal is to leave them all behind. What else did I expect? Part of him knew that what he'd expected was for primary school friendships to last. He'd expected them to keep liking him and wanting to hang out with him until they were all grown up. Because he'd liked them so much. They hadn't been like the cousins, so he'd thought they were similar to children on cartoons. Friends forever no matter the differences or distances. But that was just an embarrassing thing to want, so he pretended he hadn't. That he didn't. It was easier that way. He reached into his bag for his fountain pen. Fountain pens were his latest collectible distraction. All the different ink colors and the nibs and the chore of cleaning them gave him something to do. When school was particularly bad, he bought himself another one. Some people use them for art. Maybe I'll learn to draw. When he set the pen inside his desk, his fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. He grabbed the unexpected object and looked down. It took him a minute to realize what the thing in the pink foil wrapper was. This is a condom. They'd had an uncomfortable "so you're all growing up now" sex education class a couple of weeks ago. He'd only just managed to wipe it from his brain. Was this left over from that somehow? How could he not have noticed until today? I can't let anyone see me with this. He shoved it into the back of the desk, blushing furiously. If anyone found it, He'd have to swim to Antarctica and feed himself to a leopard seal. There would be no other option. His nerves about one of the super children developing the ability to see through wooden surfaces, or his teacher announcing that there would be a desk check for the first time ever, kept him so distracted that he almost forgot to hate class. And he'd been really devoted to hating class that week because they were playing a game. A stupid game. It's all they ever talk about anymore anyway, so I don't see why we have to make it official. It was supposed to be a career planning assignment, and it was a reward for making it through the school year. They were about to take their December break. 7th grade was pretty much over. They'd all go home for a few weeks and come back as 8th graders. This week was full of fun activities that were pretending to be work. For the assignment, they had bags full of multi-sided dice. Some were even big, 100-sided ones that looked like golf balls. To start the game, they closed their eyes and grabbed a random black bag from the plastic crate full of them at the front of the room. When you opened it up, the slip of paper inside determined your rank, and the color of your dice determined your avowed class. Congratulations! You've been selected. They had a trading time slot and fake money where everyone tried to talk their friends into giving them the general class they wanted. Then you used one of the dice to pick your subclass. And the others could be rolled to randomize whatever was applicable to your class. You looked up corresponding numbers for talents the system might offer you on a chart, and you slowly built your dream profile as well as you could within the limits of chance. Afterward, they all talked about how great it was to be that type of avowed and what kinds of jobs they could have. Loot wasn't required to participate. But if he didn't participate, he had to sit at his desk trying to read a book while everyone squealed with excitement or groaned in despair at their imaginary fates. And he caught pitying looks sometimes. He hated those, and they didn't bother to shoot as many his way if he played, too. The only one who's almost always happy with how it works out for them is Hoyu, he thought while he rolled a green die. He seemed to be gradually settling on Stamina Brute as his class preference. Nobody else ever wanted it. Kind of unexpected. His parents could get him just about anything, and what he wants is the simplest thing to get. Loot was a C-rank Meister today, rolling for his tool. Loot. Hey, Loot. Can't I have your bag? The plastic die bounced across his desk, and Loot slapped his hand on it to keep it from escaping. He looked at Carlotta. She had crossed the room with a bag full of the red brute dice in her hand. The clan was behind her. Other people's dice were clattering around. The door to the hall was open so that they could come and go to make trades and discuss things with 7th graders in the nearby classrooms. Their current teacher was chatting with one of the others by the lockers instead of monitoring them. The last days of the school year were always so haphazard. I'm already rolling for my subtype, said Loot. And I haven't been Meister before, so. He always kept whatever he drew so that he didn't have to negotiate with his classmates. It had been brute every time so far. There were more of them in the box than any of the other colors. Yeah, but I've been brute already, she said. And you know I want Meister so much. You should give it to her, Declan said. Meister's more fun than brute, said Loot. Maybe you'll get it tomorrow. Come on, said Carlotta, thrusting her dice back toward him. Don't be selfish. She needs it way more than you. These two were the worst of the worst. And Loot wasn't being a doormat anymore. That was the only thing that was keeping him sane. He wasn't giving them a damn thing. He squeezed the bag of dice. No. Leave me alone. I need to finish the assignment. And then. You really ought to give it to her. The voice cut across the classroom. Vandy Carrison had a tendency to announce things for all to hear when she made a judgment. Everyone started to look up to see who she had decided to correct. She'd been sitting on the floor by the board, casting her dice with some of the other girls. She had stood to make her proclamation. She wants to make a Meister profile to prepare herself, said Vandy, staring at Loot with her pale eyes. She'd gotten rather pretty this year. What a stupid thing to think at a time like this. You never take this seriously, Loot, she continued. You just pick random foundation points and talents that don't fit together and then write them on your form. What else would he do? Someone muttered. I don't have to give her my dice. Loot wondered why he felt nervous, suddenly. Everyone was staring. I drew them from the box the same as everyone else. Nobody has to trade. Those are the rules. Rules. Vandy loved rules. She'd probably printed out a copy of the student handbook to sleep with. You don't have to, she said slowly. But why wouldn't you? This is important to us. And it's not to you. She's kind of right, said Constantine from a desk nearby. I mean, you don't care, and she cares a lot. No, thought Loot. No, this is wrong. It's not fair. They had these looks on their faces. Like he was hurting them. Even the nice ones. The probable high ranks. The hero kids. Why? What do they expect from me? They know how she treats me, but was this game so important now that the way she treated Loot didn't matter in comparison? I guess. Vandy said, her eyes going round as if she'd suddenly had a shocking thought. Oh. Did you really want Meister, too? I guess if you did want it, that would be different. If you wanted to take building a profile seriously today. In case. A few people had still been playing around with their dice. The last one clicked to a stop, and the classroom went so quiet that they could hear the teachers murmuring together in the hall. Luke felt like every eye in the room was carving out a piece of his heart. You will never be chosen. You will never be an avowed. You will never do any magic other than word chains. Do you understand? But, Mommy, everybody else. Say you understand. I'm going to be a harpist, Luke said. I've never wanted to be anything else. Why would I take any of this seriously? Something left the room. Some enormous tension between him and them, worse than any he'd ever felt before, faded. Eyes rolled, chairs creaked. Of course he doesn't want to be a Meister for real, Vandy. He's got his own thing. He played boring music for like an hour at the talent show. Quadruple decimals got his woo-oo future planned out, Declan said. He shoved his hand into Luke's desk. It was clear he knew exactly what he was looking for. And look. He's being responsible. He slapped Luke on the back hard and held up the pink foil wrapper. We must prevent more weefs. People gasped. Or laughed. Declan, seriously, what's wrong with you? Said Con. That's not funny. Is that a condom? Someone said in horror. Is it? Vandy asked, looking around for an answer. Luke suddenly didn't care at all about the condom. It was just Hazel's original revelation about how some avowed talked about people like him in a new form. The terrible joke of the day. Instead, he cared about the fact that when Carlotta reached for his dice, his fingers let go. Even the nice ones had said he shouldn't have them, so. Everyone else was freaking out about that condom though. They made a ton of noise about it, the teachers heard, and Declan got dragged off to the principal's office. Luke sat in his desk, and he tried to roll his dice. Red ones. His vision was blurry for some reason. Not tears, surely. He was 13. He'd seriously rather be eaten by a leopard seal than cry in front of them. But he couldn't see the numbers. 2 days later, when everyone went to select their dice bags, they discovered some of the dice had been replaced. The discovery came after the colors had been seen and the trades had happened. It came after almost everyone was holding the dice set for their dream class. Sometimes, when you rolled one, instead of getting the number that should have been on that face, you got a percentage. And a message written in tiny logograms. People had to look up the meanings on their phones. This is an A-rank adjuster's chance of returning home after an emergency summons, Khan said in a high voice. Mine's for rank brute. And there's another die with the chance of being killed in combat on Earth. Here's one for unhealable mind damage, Tyet whispered. Mine's S-rank Meister. It's for death on Matadero. But the number's 0. Yes, thought Loot, sitting at his desk with the red dice again. I wanted to be even-handed. Nobody ever actually dies on Matadero. Mine's the annual chance of getting an emergency summons as an S-rank. Is the death rate really this high for S-rank life shapers? Someone said in a panicked voice. You guys. Is it? My mom gets summoned sometimes, and she's an S-rank life shaper, Alden and Luke stared at each other for a long time without saying anything. "All right then," Alden said finally. "That was all horrible. I know. I ruined the end of the school year. And apparently Hoyu's mother was on an emergency summons when I did it. He was probably really scared for her. I didn't know. He should have punched me. I hope I wouldn't have done it if I had known, but I'm not sure." I snapped. Really snapped. It took more than a day to look up all the statistics, design the dice, and have them third printed. And it still felt like a reasonable and measured response when I shoved them in the bags. "I didn't really mean you," said Alden. "Just all of it. Your school sounds like hell." "They did take me to see Victoria Falls," said Luke. "It was breathtaking." Then he grimaced. "Hoyu's tried to get me to hang out with some of them a couple of times. During Diwali. This morning at the skate park. He says he thinks being selected made them more mature, and I do believe him. Mostly. The mood was already starting to shift when I left Paragon to come to CNH. But you should see their faces when they look at me." Alden had seen their faces when Luke's name was mentioned. He could imagine. People like Vandy didn't hate me before I said I hope they and their parents all got summoned to die agonizing deaths. Was that really what you were trying to say? No. But that's how they took it. My enraged 13-year-old self thought he was making an impressive point. About how if the dice were so serious that I was a bad person for not giving one of my bullies her favorite color, then maybe the dice should actually be serious. That nuance was lost on everyone else. It turns out that a die covered in ways you and your loved ones might die doesn't lend itself to conveying anything beyond, die, all of you. He rested his elbows on the table and propped his chin on his hands. It was getting later. The noises of people moving through the building and outside on the walkways had gone quiet. I don't think any of them ever understood I was upset about them making me give up the dice. They thought it was all about the condom, and I was being insane by taking out my anger on them when they didn't have anything to do with it. He looked at Alden. "I told you the story because I wanted to explain. I don't feel that way. I grew up here. I know seriously bad shit happens to Avowed sometimes. And I know it's not something to mock." Alden cleared his throat. "What are the statistics for B-rank rabbits getting stuck on moons without systems?" Luke's face relaxed. "You'll never believe this, but I didn't include that one on my terrible Avowed Facts dice. Major oversight. You'll have to pay more attention to the safe ranks and classes next time." "Chenner's a safe class," said Luke. "The safest there is. Everyone knows we don't die. I guess Keiko could doing hero work, but the rest of us. I can't imagine that adds to my old classmate's opinion about my character." "Oh, screw that. Your character's fine," said Alden. "Except, you know." "What?" Luke asked worriedly. "You're a bathtub hog," said Alden in a serious tone. "I know it's usually Alexei who complains, but that's only because he wants to hog the tub, too. Hoyu and I get nothing but showers. We're starting to talk bad about you both. You guys get the fancy drug sauna. You don't need the tub." "We pay for the drug sauna," Alden said. "The tub is a free household resource. We are entitled to a quarter of all tub nights each. I understand you're used to having constant access to multiple swimming pools. Only 2. Or 3 if I didn't mind putting up with certain people. And in the absence of your 2 or 3 swimming pools, you're clearly suffering from a lack of hydration," said Alden. "Like some kind of tropical vulva plant. But you need to learn to water yourself in the shower once in a while instead." Luke looked thoughtful. "Are you going to tell Lexi he is a tub hog, too?" "No way. He carries a whip with him to the bathroom. Hoyu can tell him." Tobe continued.